Hello. It's hello. It's good to be live and good to be with you again. And happy Day of Languages today. Yeah, European Day of Languages, I might add. So today, the 26th of September, is the European Day of Languages. So it felt like the right thing to do to have this as the topic for today and what it actually means to celebrate languages. It's been an interesting year and a half, 2 years of COVID and being at home and yeah, actually evaluating what kind of things we do and how we do them. And I think for me personally, it's been a year and a half of experiencing languages that I wouldn't have ordinarily studied. And this all started actually after the language event in Edinburgh, where we celebrated the languages of the Isles. That's to say, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and the Isle of Man. We celebrated all of the languages of the Isles where I'm from. And that included, obviously, the two Germanic languages that are spoken, which are English and Scots, and then also the Celtic languages that are spoken as well. And it was really something that I arrived back from that event on, it was like this weekend that covered the end of February, beginning of March. And I arrived back on the 3rd of March, I believe, at home. And that was basically the start of like lockdowns and things like that. It was the start of sort of what we now experience as kind of a normal thing. And what was interesting was it was at a time where I was studying languages actually outside of Europe. I was studying some Maori at the time, which is obviously spoken in New Zealand, and I was studying some Persian, which is language of Iran, spoken in a number of other neighboring countries too, different variations or versions of Persian. And what happened was a number of languages came online to be taught. And I thought this was actually a really good way of celebrating those languages by learning about them, learning something of them. Possibly, I was aware that I wouldn't get to a level of fluency that would be something I would be able to use in a confident manner. But I thought that this is why I always think that when you learn a bit of something, it's often actually quite a handy thing to do. And it gives me the additional information about a language, it's the people and culture, to be able to talk in a more confident way as well when I meet other people. So therefore, that knowledge continues to be shared when you meet other people. And so when this happened, I really have focused quite a lot on some of the languages of Europe that possibly are not as spoken about or as well known. So the first one was North Sami, which clearly in Sapni, which takes up the Scandinavian countries at the very top, and another bit of Russia as well. So Sapni, for example, where there are a number of Sami languages, studying North Sami for 3 months last year. And then later I did the Scots course at the University of Edinburgh, which was an intensive 3-week course. And again, a language that normally you wouldn't get to study. And then I went further into some more of the Celtic languages like Scottish Gaelic and into Cornish. And it's been a real experience, like getting into these kinds of languages and sort of learning more about them and learning to communicate to some degree as well. I mean, it's been that way with Cornish, for example. I actually sat the exam, the final exam for grade 1, and it was a lot of fun. It was a really big adventure. And I think days like today, and I asked the question, what does it mean to you this day? What does this day mean? What does it mean to celebrate languages generally? And a number of you said different things. It's good to sort of celebrate languages and people. Each country has their own official language that they use, but also the languages within the countries. And I find that actually doing this and taking this time to learn about them has been really useful. And normally I would travel during the year and I would do different things. So this year it really has been a case that I can't do that. So it's really freed me up to do something quite different. And so my sort of goal really is to look at these kinds of celebrations as an ongoing thing, and these days as times to talk about them and discuss them and find out information. So what I think I want to do today is to talk to you and to find out your questions, and particularly about languages, about things that you think for you are important, and to make this a longer Q&A session than normal, because I think that that's really the spirit of the day, and celebrating languages. So yes, I'm going to start looking at the questions now that I have, and thank you all so much for joining me. So I see, for me, the day is a good day, but a day doesn't. Yeah, it's not enough, right? Exactly. I agree that this is why I say it needs to be the day where you have a particular day where people who don't normally talk about these things talk about these things, and for otherwise, I think it should be a sort of a place where we discuss maybe what we've done, and the whole actual experience of celebrating languages and learning about them and the cultures and the people is something that's an ongoing thing that happens throughout the year. And that's what I'd like to think that I do with my activities online, and also what I like to do just with my own study. I think that it's really important. Nice to be back. Do you wonderful lives? Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're back too. Thank you so much. Okay, so I see some questions here. Hi Richard, you've inspired me to learn languages. Well, I'm very happy to hear that. That's always really nice to see. And you're very welcome. Benim için gerçekten önemli bir oldu. Hem yeni bir dil öğrenmeye, hem de hayata bakış açım sayesinde. Teşekkürler, rica ederim. Benim için de çok önemli bir şeydir ve bu yüzden ben sürekli yeni bir dil öğrenmek istiyorum. Ve bu yüzden de eskiden bu çok kolay değildi. Çünkü evet, internetsiz ben bunu yapamazdım ve ama gerçekten COVID'den sonra şimdi daha kolay oldu. Ben şimdi Üsküp'te Cornwallca mesela öğrendim ve bu şimdi çok kolay bir şeydi. Ama gerçekten çok mutluyum çünkü ben burada Makedonya'dan yeni bir şeyler benim ülkeden öğrendim ve bu çok şaşırdım ama çok iyi bir şey, değil mi? Goedenavond, altijd bij weer te gezien. Ja, en te luisteren. Ja, bedankt alvast. Dat is leuk om te zien. Hè? What about Karelian, an endangered language of Russia at the border of Finland, and the language which is related to Sami? Yeah, there are a number of languages like that are sort of not very well known about in even in the language community, I guess. It's just another language you see on a list sometimes. I've got to also admit that there are obviously languages that I don't know much about myself. I can't know about all 7,000 languages of the world. That would be pretty difficult to do. But what I can do is every time I meet people who know something about them is ask them questions. And this is why sometimes when you are a language learner, people will ask you these questions. And even if you're not from that community or you haven't even been to that place, learning about the people, the places, and the languages so that you can actually impart some information as well is always good. And that's why I think that this is an ongoing thing, the celebration of languages. Language is an interesting topic because everybody's got an opinion to a degree, right? So it's one of those subjects that people on buses will talk about different accents and different dialects and different words and different languages, and they will talk about them within the realms of their own reality, right? So, I mean, we're not talking about deep philosophical debate on linguistics, and it's more of a generic conversation, but it's an interesting thing that people always have opinions on it, and everybody to a degree as well will be able to assess the kind of language that you speak. So, for example, if you speak languages that are related, then people will often be able to tell where about you're from. If you speak a certain dialect within a language, then again, where you're from to put you in a certain area. Also, there may be historical things that are tied to that area or that country or that place where you might be from. It's interesting how people can make those kinds of judgments themselves. Also, the thing that I find interesting is, um, and rightly or wrongly, usually wrongly, unfortunately, I believe, that people will make judgments on the type of language you speak. So whether you speak to a close version to the standard of the language, or whether it is more on the continuum towards another language and another standard, perhaps, or wherever you may sit. But people will often pass judgment on that. They'll almost be sort of assessing people's different linguistic abilities in sometimes a subconscious way, but there are things that go on behind the scenes when people do that. They have judgments, and they make assumptions, sometimes quite wrongly, but they do. And so language is just sort of intrinsically linked to this sort of, are you in this group or that group, and how do you speak, and how do you use words, and do you use this word, and do you use that word? And it's really interesting that that for you is the normal way of saying this, and this for me is the normal way of saying this. And I hear these discussions all the time. So I always find language is something people always talk about. The cool thing with the number of languages is that you can actually add, even as a person who didn't grow up speaking that language, you can often add to that conversation yourself, because you may bring in other languages and other areas that you know about that they don't. So to give you an example, people who have got Turkish in their common language, sort of vernacular, the language they use, this is very often very common in my home language of Macedonian, but also in Serbian, or in Bulgarian to a degree, in Greek. What they might know is it might be a Turkish word, but often people won't know is where that came in from Turkish. Was it an Arabic word? Was it a Turkish word, or was it actually a Persian word? And so these kinds of levels also fit in as well, because this is the thing, right? We all sort of mesh together in some way with language. It's not just a pure story of this is this and that's it. It's often, there's a lot more going on as to how all of this has sort of come about. Where can you study the rare languages of Europe, like Sami, Celtic languages, local Romance and Germanic languages? Okay, so there are quite a lot of questions there. I'll do my best to answer them all. So Sami, it was actually with a course that was run in Norway, and it was with the Sami Institute in Norway, and I signed up, and they did the course online. And basically, we went through the book that the teacher had put together to teach Sami, and we were I think the first group to actually go through it. So that's where I did that, and it's like the Sami Institute in Oslo. So there can't be many of them. So I'm sure it will come up. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It's over a year and a half ago. So unfortunately, I've possibly heard too many different things since then. And when you start the class, you obviously just know the teacher, so you're sort of just on Zoom, and the name's not repeated over and over again after you've sort of just originally applied to join. The other thing, I will try and actually find out the name though, and I'll put it in the description after the live is finished. The other thing that I have found for the Celtic languages, for example, there are some really cool links that you can go to. So for Welsh, there's a really good website called learnwelsh.cymru, and I'll put a link to that as well. That's got lots of resources for Welsh. For called Raganana, which has got it's a paid course, but it's pretty cool to take you through the basics of Irish and into the intermediate levels. And I found that to be quite good. I think there are some free resources as well. Some of the people may be able to put them in if you have them. For Scottish Gaelic, there's actually a new site being launched, and I think it's going to be called learngaelic.scot. And I'll find the link and I'll put it in for you so that you can find that after the live. For Manx, there is a Manx website as well. And I'll put the link in, and that's got lots of lessons in Manx. For Cornish, there are a number of sites. I actually wrote an entire post about learning Cornish on my blog, so I will share that link to the blog post so that you can have that as well. For Breton, I'm not so sure. I know the Discord server that exists for Breton, and you can join that and get access to people who speak Breton and learn it with them. But otherwise, I'm not so sure if they've got as many things. There's definitely the Assimil course that they have for Breton. Otherwise, I'm not sure of anything else. And then the Germanic languages, the next one's Romance languages. So there are a number of Romance languages, a bit difficult to go into all of them because there are so many. There are tutors on italki that have, for example, there are a couple of new Lombard italki teachers now. And if you look on in the description, there's actually, I can get you a discount for that. There's a discount through the Polyglot conference, which I've linked to, but also if you put my name in, you get an extra $5 off. So yeah, if you want to do that, you can, and check out those resources as well. And then as for Germanic, depending on the Germanic you want, but there are a number of people you can follow for these kinds of things on social media. Yeah, and so a friend of mine, Martin, does a Low Saxon or Twensk, which is sort of Low German or Plattdeutsch, Platt, that's spoken in the Netherlands, but also it's extended, like the variations of it go right the way through to the Polish border, all along sort of the borders with Germany, the Netherlands, and then across the north of Germany to so there's that language. There's also Luxembourgish, which you may want to learn. It looks first TV stations where they had everything online. RTL, it was in Luxembourgish online it's been on there since like the 90s, like the mid-90s. It was one of the first TV stations that went online, in fact, Luxembourg, with national TV, and they have so many things. So I mean, what's really interesting with Luxembourgish TV, if you've ever seen it, is they will speak in Luxembourgish and then they will interview people in French or German, but they don't need subtitles to translate because they just recognize that everybody in the country understands all three languages. So they just have the interviews in those languages, which I think is pretty cool. And then in other Germanic languages, I can't think of any others that I know of with resources that are pretty for learners, for example. But for Luxembourgish, there are definitely books and courses that you can get. There's an Assimil course that you can get for Luxembourgish. There's also Letzeboisch für alle, which is another course, which is kind of this blue and then there's a green book that you can get. So there are all of those. Let me see. It's a beautiful thing that one can experience in regards to learning and speaking a language. Yeah, it is. I love that too, Chanel. It's very, very nice to be able to do that. A friend of mine is Karelian. The younger generation don't speak it anymore. Well, that's a real shame, Alphonse. I think it's one of those things that happens in many places where the new generations often don't see the benefit, or they think that speaking the larger language as seen as the larger language in the region, the dominant or predominant language in the region is possibly more advantageous. That's a very common thing to happen, and yeah, unfortunately, it does happen. I think this is a good day to actually say, it is worthwhile learning and conserving and preserving the languages we speak in our communities. There's absolutely no reason why people can't be at least bi-trilingual. and speak all of the languages, right? There's no reason why somebody can't speak Karelian, Russian, and then also English or another language. There's no reason why that can't happen. In fact, there are many studies that have been done to show that it's actually good for your brain's health to do that kind of thing, to have more than one language, and it's actually beneficial. So what a shame when that happens, but unfortunately politics does play a part. Social social pressure also plays a part in this kind of thing, and where people, maybe especially when languages are very different to the other language that's spoken, so it can often be a little bit more little bit trickier to sort of keep the language going, or to revive a language when the language is significantly different to the point that it's not got any degree of mutual intelligibility. And you see this quite a lot, I think, with languages in Europe where the language is significantly different, and then where you see a language that is more similar, or at least related, like in Catalonia, for example, in Spain, where it's a bit easier to sort of to strengthen a language like Catalan, or to strengthen a language like Galician, just because they're still a Romance language, and so it's not a huge stretch for people who come and speak Spanish to be able to follow things, right? It's not a huge stretch. I'm not going to say it's a perfect situation, but it's not as challenging, for example, as going to the Basque Country and learning Basque, or going from England and going to learn Welsh, or these languages differ a lot more than say, Catalan, Spanish, and Galician, for example. And you see that as well in other countries, where languages, where they're similar, you can retain them a little bit more easily. Also, the other thing is also true, that where they are very similar and people say that basically they speak a bad version of the language, then unfortunately the mindset of a nation, or of certain people within a country, can be almost convinced. And you see that sometimes in Scotland, with Scots speakers, people who speak Scots, but they maybe mix it a lot with English, with Scottish English, and the two kind of merge. And you do hear of that sometimes, where people almost negate the existence of their own language as a sort of a valid and important language as well. So you do get that too, unfortunately. Let me see. Can I learn 2 languages at the same time? Of course you can. You can try whatever you want. You can try 3 if you want. It just depends on your time and how much energy and ability you've got to be able to do that. But yes, it's completely possible. How about current language revivals like Gothic, Gaulish, and Old Prussian? Do you know, I don't know too much about those revival attempts myself. I have read a little bit about the revival of Cumbric, which is another Brythonic language that was spoken in the north of England, in Cumbria, and then also Norn, which is a Germanic language that was spoken in the Shetlands. So I know of a few things like that are sort of revival attempts now, but I don't know about these other older languages so much. So I would definitely want to learn a little bit more. Do you know any Austronesian languages? So I've studied some. I guess Maori would fit into that group. So I studied some Maori, and I speak a little bit of Maori, but not very well. Like at the moment, it's very, very basic. So I would never say that I speak it. I've studied some of it, and and I enjoy it very much. And it's a language I'd like to pick up again. Hopefully, with a trip to New Zealand at some point too, that would be fantastic. Language and dialect is part of your identity. My native dialect is Low Saxon, a dialect or language which is between Dutch and German. Yeah, Alphonse, so the Low Saxon might be the Twensk that I was talking about before. In fact, a friend of mine, Martin, who's on Twitter and he's active on TikTok, talks a lot about this, and he Yeah, he actually does lives as well on TikTok, speaking in language. It's pretty cool. My parents didn't speak the language with me. I understand, but unfortunately can't hardly speak it. Alphonse, you can actually learn it, and he's very keen that people learn it. So maybe you want to connect. Message me, and I'm happy to kind of put you in touch to give you the details. I may even be able to put them in the description so that you can find Martin as well. Harwich, when is the right time for you to start speaking in your target language? Should I wait until I can distinguish all the sounds of the language before speaking? Hmm, okay, I mean, I'm a big fan of speaking as soon as you can, to say things, to start practicing things, to get your active ability in the language up and running. And the only way to do that is to actively use the language. If you're not using the language, then what you can end up becoming is a kind of polymath, somebody who reads lots of languages but doesn't necessarily speak them. Some polymaths do. Their reading ability is way better than their spoken ability, but it just depends on what your goals are. There's absolutely nothing wrong with becoming a polymath and never using the language to speak. If you want to speak it, though, I would definitely suggest that you start practicing as soon as you can. It helps to get things right, and also you may get corrections on your pronunciation, so you can start hearing things and hearing where you're saying it incorrectly or it's not quite understandable, and so you can get a lot of help that way if you start doing it. Lucas, hey Richard, happy European Day of Languages. Thank you very much. How is your study of Estonian going? It's going actually. I'm doing 15 words a day now on Speakly. I've gone down from 30 to 15. So then I should complete the Speakly app by the end of this year, and we'll see how I am. At the moment, it's not so bad. I mean, I can still sort of speak. I don't think I would notice a huge difference from sort of the start of the month to now, because I think I've got to the point where, you sort of go through this very basic, nothing, and then all of a sudden you know something. So it feels like you've rocketed up, and kind of now it feels like I'm just sort of not very much better, but clearly I must have seen a lot more stuff, so I must know and understand more. It's just I don't have that feeling just yet. Also, this month, my Estonian teacher has been away. She was on holiday in Italy, and so I've not started back with my lessons yet. So when I stop back with my lessons, I think I might have a better idea as to where I am. My guess is that I possibly have forgotten some things that I did in July and August. May need some help getting back to that, but I think that's probably a little bit better, but around the same level, around about. It's a long slog to get through the kind of the B1 type stage, and because there are just so many topics that you need to cover, and then you're still solidifying the kind of the very basic stuff that you learned. Because I mean, bearing in mind that I started this month kind of 2,000 words, and I'm at like 2,500 and something. So it's a long slog. It's a long slog. Are there any other languages you're actually pursuing at the moment? Yes, actually there are. I'm studying Cornish. I'm continuing with my Cornish. I'm going to do the grade 2 exam next year, and then I'm doing Gaelic and Irish, which we'll see how that goes with the Irish and the Gaelic together. And then also I sort of they're the active study languages, right, that I study, and then there are some languages that I'm having sort of either classes or exchange things for, just to kind of keep speaking them because I'm not traveling. And one of those is Greek, because I don't get to go to Greece at the moment. Usually it's a place that I would go to at least 6 times a year, because it's very, very close to where we are. But at the moment, I don't get to go to Greece at all. I've not been there for a year and a half. So I do have some Greek. to make sure I don't forget my Greek. And we're doing lots of different fun topics, so it's quite cool. And the other thing that I do is what else do I do? So I've been actually talking to my Maori teacher again, my friend who speaks Maori, and seeing if I can get back into it. I'd like to get back into it. It's a lot of fun. I don't know how crazy I'm being. It's like taking on so many all at once. It feels like the Celtic languages are a little bit less crazy to do because I already speak Welsh to a degree, and that helps. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Okay, let me see. I have some more questions here as well. Sorry, it takes me a bit of time to go through them. For low Saxon, yeah, wel de sproken. Okay, yeah, it's interesting because Martin always discusses the sort of the link between low Saxon actually and Scandinavian languages, which I found quite interesting as a thing. Happy European language day. Thank you very much. I would like to learn some Catalan. Strangely, Duolingo does not offer it. Could you recommend some resources? Okay, yeah. So at university for Catalan, when I was in the Czech Republic, I used a course called Digi Digi, which is Digui, which means like say, tell me. And so I used that at university, but there's an Asimil course for it. There's a teach yourself course for it. There's a colloquial course for it. I'm trying to think what else there is that I've used, but that's it. I've used those 5 for Catalan, and the Digi Digi course I actually quite enjoyed doing. I don't know how accessible it is or whether it's available anymore. It's a long time since I studied it at university, but yeah, that's what I used, and then I brushed things up and used the other 3 as well. I just find them interesting to read, and I was at classes obviously when I was at university, but yeah, they're the ones I used. Was actually Lingua offers Catalan, but in Spanish. Oh, it does offer. It offers Catalan, but through Spanish. Okay. Yeah, it's the same thing actually on Duolingo. I think with Gorani. Gorani is also offered through Spanish, not through English. So another one that you get, and it's not often obvious that it's there, but it's there. Buenas tardes a todos. Richard, ¿qué piensa usted cuando los nativos pierden el interés por su idioma? ¿Qué medida podrían cambiar eso? Es como, quiere decir de tu idioma, quiere decir. Por ejemplo, a mí me gusta mucho el inglés. El inglés es mi idioma. Es que es el idioma que hablo mejor. Entonces, nunca lo abandonaría porque me gusta mucho y para mí suena bien, y también es un idioma que tiene muchas cosas interesantes, pero igual para otros idiomas no sé hasta qué punto eso sería un problema, pero podría ser, sí. Depende también de la experiencia de la persona. Por ejemplo, si una persona es de un país, de una región donde hablaban otro idioma y luego entró un idioma más grande, digamos, que realmente mató a las otras culturas o otros idiomas. Es que a veces la gente sí que tiene emociones bastante vinculadas, negativas a lo mejor también, o tristes, por causa de una historia bastante larga o difícil. Es que pasa así también a veces, y eso sí es un poco más difícil interpretar tu pregunta, pero estoy intentando interpretar la pregunta de esa forma, ¿no? Y para mí sí que encontrar personas así que no quieren hablar su idioma ya porque ya se han trasladado a otro país y quieren estar en la otra cultura y quieren hablar el otro idioma, y ya han perdido ya el interés en el país de origen. Así que eso sí que pasa de vez en cuando. Depende de la persona, depende también de si molesta mucho, si, si es un problema más profundo, también podría ser difícil volver a querer el idioma, depende mucho de la situación, pero entiendo de ambos lados, de hecho. Um, the one thing that impressed me in Catalonia was that I very look for translating modern books into Catalan. A lot of okay, yeah, absolutely. It's true in a number of languages they do try and do this. Uh, Not everywhere though. For example, I mean, here very often we will just read things in Serbian or Croatian because sometimes waiting for the Macedonian translation can take quite a long time. So it might even be that you read it in English or through Serbian or Croatian translation. Everyone kind of understands those languages without any real issue. So it's not a big deal. That often happens as well at university. So people would have books. I think it's less and less nowadays, but certainly like 10 years ago, it would be very, very common that you would have books that were just in Serbian or Croatian. Yeah, it's interesting actually how much focus is put on the translation of books. It's got better here in recent years. So I mean, we have things like the Gruffalo translated into Macedonian and stuff like that. Things that are famous, like sort of kids' books, that didn't exist when I first came to this region. That was kind of really I didn't see much of that. It tended to be the classics that were translated, and sort of the modern type stuff was it's sort of always a work in progress, if that makes sense. So you never really saw them. But yeah, good to know that's your experience there. Inga, nice to see you again. Wow, it's been a while. Have you ever studied any Greenlandic? I've signed up for an online course starting on Wednesday. Super excited. Oh, Inga, you are very naughty. I would love to learn. I'd love to learn Greenlandic. Send me the link. Oh my word. No, seriously, it's like it's a language that I've been fascinated by and just not got around to it so far. But I would love to learn Greenlandic. I think sounds wonderful. I'm very, very happy for you that you're doing it. And get me on the course as well. Irish seems like such a hard language because look, I'm not going to say it's easy. What I'm finding with this Raganan, which is the course that I'm following at the moment, is that the more I see of it, the more it's starting to make sense. If that makes sense. It's taking time, but I'm seeing patterns in Irish that are sort of coming through, and I'm also seeing words that I didn't realize that were also in Welsh, which are like, wow, okay, I know that from Welsh, and I didn't realize that word would be in Irish too. Yeah. Is it the same family as Gaelic? Yeah, so Irish. So with the Celtic languages, you kind of have two branches. You've got, so the Celtic languages start at the bottom, obviously, the sort of Proto-Celtic, but then you go from there to the Brythonic and the Goidelic sides. And so the Brythonic side, you have Welsh, Cornish, and then you have Breton, and then you also had, possibly may have again in the future, Cumbric. And then on the other side, the Gaelic side, you have Irish, Scottish Gaelic, Manx, and I think that's it. I think that's it. Yeah, for that side. So yeah, we will see. It is the two languages are quite similar so far. I mean, so Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, and Irish have got a lot of similarities. There are also a number of things that are very different, but they have got some similarities, which is a help and a hindrance sometimes. But I'm doing my best to focus on pronunciation so that I don't mix them up so much. Hopefully that will work. But even before I started actively learning Irish, I'd done a little bit of Irish in the past, and I found that I would always say the Irish words in my Gaelic. So I was like, okay, I'm going to say it anyway. I may as well actually improve my Irish if it's coming out. So we'll see how it goes. watch this space. I can always stop one for a while if it gets too much. If I want to study as many languages, in only one institution in the UK, where would it be? From what I know, SOAS has the most. Potentially, it's very difficult for me to give really up-to-date information on that right now. Things have changed a lot since I studied in the UK. When I was there, my degree is in 4 languages. So I did a degree in my first degree was in French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, and it was a degree called Combined Languages. And when I was studying, which is like 95 to 99, there were only 5 universities in the United Kingdom that offered that degree, and they were Nottingham, Durham, Liverpool, Hull, which is where I went, and where's the other one? Edinburgh. Edinburgh was the other one. And when I applied, actually, all of them would only offer 3 languages right the way through to the 4th year. So in Liverpool, I could do Catalan I think it was like something like Catalan for 1 year, and then I had to switch to Irish, but I couldn't do Catalan all the way through. And then in Edinburgh, I was accepted to study French, Spanish, and Arabic. But when I went to visit, the Arabic teacher was super negative about Arabic. So I was like, okay, if the teacher's not positive about me learning this language now, how am I going to learn with this teacher? So I was like, okay, that's not going to happen. Nottingham and Durham, I can't remember what they were, but I do remember for my own university for Hull, we had French, Spanish, and then Italian were like main languages, and then you did Portuguese for 2 years of the 3 years in the UK. You did Portuguese for 2 as part of the Hispanic Studies department, and that's what I did. But I also sat in on the Scandinavian Studies degree for 2 years too. I did Swedish and Old Icelandic, but they're not on my. I think they're on my first year records because I did it as part of my first year officially, but they're not on my university records as like having studied it. But I just did it and didn't do the exams for the second year. So there we go. That's how I learned Swedish for university, but I don't have any certificates in it. Just learned it that way. But in terms of the most languages, yeah, possibly so. Possibly. I used to go to the University of Westminster for a while. I was there for a while when I lived in London, and I did a number of language courses there. I did. I've done a few things like that, but I'm not sure in terms of like a full degree where you do the most now. It's a bit difficult to say. It's worth checking out the universities that I mentioned that I went to or that I applied to or was interested in, because I'm sure some of them still do things like that, but I'm not sure which ones. I know Hull doesn't do it anymore. I know they don't offer my degree anymore. That's completely gone. In fact, some of the departments that I worked with don't exist anymore. I don't think they have a Scandinavian Studies department, for example, sadly. What are your thoughts on Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input theory? It's potentially a topic for my thesis in my master's education in teaching Irish. Okay, Gaurav Mahagat. Okay, so John, I think he's got a point. So I mean, I've met Stephen Krashen. We met in Canada, and thoroughly nice person to meet and to talk to, by the way. Absolutely charming and really funny. He's really funny, and yeah, I really, really enjoyed spending time with him, and I would definitely love to hang out with him again in the future. So we talked about his comprehensible input. My initial reaction when I first met him was like, what are you talking about? But the more he talked about it and the more he sort of described what he meant, I was kind of on board with it, in so much as it's the important thing is the comprehensible bit, right? So it's not just sort of sticking on the radio when you know nothing and expecting it to come in by osmosis. It's the comprehensible element that's important here. So it needs to be something that's sort of right for you. So the theory itself sounds pretty solid in terms of, you know, if you're being subjected to language that is appropriate for your level and moves you forward, then of course it's going to help. It's going to, because you're going to start picking up more and more and more of the stuff, right? You'll have a certain amount of words that you won't know. This is a bit like how Speakly works with this kind of methodology, and that's probably why I found it quite simple to move forward with Estonian on it. In terms of just doing this, so I've heard different people speak on this topic before, and this whole idea of like being completely silent for until you're at a B2 level. I heard someone say once, and I was like, wow, I can't even imagine being silent until I get to a B2 level. B2 level, super high level. I think that, you know, it's often sort of thrown out there like it's nothing, and it really isn't nothing. It's quite an achievement to get to a B1 or a B2 level in a language that you can communicate at those levels. In fact, even at the end of an A2, you can communicate to a fair degree as well on a number of subjects. So I find that a bit weird, but I don't think that's necessarily his take on it. I think that's just people combining his take with this silent period of saying nothing. But there we go. That's kind of where I stand on it. I think that he has got a point. Absolutely. What ancient languages have you studied? So I've studied Old Icelandic or Old Norse, depending on how you want to describe it. I did that at university for a year. So I did just for 1 year. I did the sagas at university because I was desperate to do Icelandic, and the only Icelandic I could do was Old Icelandic. So I thought, like, okay, I'm going to do that. Yeah. So yeah, that was the only one I've done. I've looked at Latin, and I can read Latin to a degree. It's not I've not studied it enough to be able to say that I actually speak Latin or can read it very, very fluently. But of course, having studied a number of the languages from Latin, it is easier to go back and sort of extrapolate and see and make things out. And knowing case systems from other languages as well, it's not a big shock to see cases. So yeah. Otherwise, other ancient languages, I've not really studied. I had to translate at school. We had to do translations from Old English and Middle English into Modern English as part of our language change. But that was school, and it wasn't in very great depth. But yeah, when I see that kind of language, yeah, I mean, I don't understand. I've not studied it, so I don't understand it particularly well. But it does make some sense to me, if that makes sense. But yo quiero decir de un nativo que hablan un idioma poco conocido y lo cambian a otro más hablado por razones económicas y políticas. ¿Qué se podría cambiar eso? Es bastante difícil. Eso sí que es un problema que existe en el mundo también. Es que muchas veces sí que tienen la educación y todo en otro idioma, no en el idioma de la casa, por ejemplo. Y eso sí que sucede en varios países del mundo. Y creo que sí es un problema que es un poco difícil resolver. Y porque hay que dar también peso a lo que se sabe de la casa, como se habla, por ejemplo, en el pueblo de donde uno viene. Y eso sí existe como problema en México, por ejemplo. La gente que habla maya o otro idioma, así que a veces ni siquiera no saben que existe una forma escrita del idioma. A veces piensan que son solo los códigos que existen, ¿no? en el idioma. Y eso sí que es un problema en plan, porque no saben cómo empezar a estudiar el idioma. Y eso sí que resulta difícil porque, a ver, los dibujos, ah, ah, los caracteres y todo esto en otro idioma, que es un idioma antiguo, una versión antigua del idioma, es que a veces sí que te da miedo, ¿no? Y por eso, si ven de repente que se puede escribir también en nuestra letra, como en español, ayuda bastante a reconocer que realmente se puede leer cosas, también se puede hacer varias cosas en el idioma mismo, pero para, hasta, para llegar hasta aquel punto. Así que es difícil porque ya como dijiste, como escribiste, a veces los problemas económicos políticos tienen. Por ejemplo, hay que vivir, ¿no? No estamos hablando de mi punto de vista así, en plan, a mí me gustan los idiomas, pues muy bien para mí, pues, pero para la gente así viviendo en las comunidades, hablando un idioma que realmente para ellos no se habla fuera de su comunidad, es un poco difícil decir a esta persona que hay que hablar tu idioma, tú mejor, mejor que hables así, porque, claro, quieren ir adelante y a lo mejor es una persona que no tiene tanto, puede ser que no tenga interés en idioma, ¿no? También es posible. Y eso sí que sucede de vez en cuando con otros idiomas. Yo también he escuchado varias historias de este tipo de gente que querían para los niños que hablasen un idioma y luego se van a una escuela donde se habla este idioma y aprenden todo en el idioma mismo. Y luego se van fuera y también había a lo mejor otro idioma. En el caso que estoy pensando ahora mismo es con Maori, con inglés, y a lo mejor hablan inglés. Y luego se van a otro país y dicen, pues, ¿para qué aprendí este idioma? Porque nadie habla. Y hubiera podido aprender durante todo este año un idioma ah, más útil para encontrar trabajo, como el alemán o como el chino mandarín o como el japonés, o lo que sea. Y, y a veces sí que tiene se siente como una sensación muy negativa. Y por eso a veces no quieren aprender. Y es difícil, es un problema bastante difícil para abordar, la verdad. Um, so it's super interesting to hear. So old Irish and modern Irish are kind of okay. Well, okay. I think that's a part of the conversation. Sorry. Some days ago, I found an Estonian translation of the poetry by. Oh, nice to see you, Eva. By the way, of Macedonian poet Nicola. Okay, thank you. Oh wow, that might be interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Um, in 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 Estonian and Macedonian. Wow, I've never seen anything like that before. That would be pretty cool to see. What's the best way to learn new vocabulary? Um, often in context and using it as you would and you'd want to use it. So learning things that are relevant to your life, learning things that are relevant to your situation. I always think that it makes no sense to learn lots of vocabulary that has nothing to do with your reality. So learning sort of a list of 130 countries and their nationalities and languages makes no sense in the very beginning. Or learning sort of every single object in the house in the first week of learning the language makes no sense because you're realistically not going to be able to use that vocabulary. And so it may take you months and months and months and months to expand your grammatical knowledge and ability to express yourself to actually be able to need or use that kind of language. So the important thing is definitely with vocabulary is focusing on what you definitely need. Second thing you can do is then look at memorizing it using stories, funny stories, if you find it particularly challenging to memorize. So breaking words down into component parts, trying to see where they're from or what they sound like with something you already know in your head. And then the more you sort of make it a story or you can relate it to something you already know, the quicker and more easily you'll be able to recall it as well. So yeah, that would be my big thing to do. Yeah. With English, I mean, Spanish and English share a lot of vocabulary, so you have a lot of words already that you can use, but that would be my main thing to do. Do you plan to write a book about your experiences? Not necessarily being a polyglot, maybe about linguistic and culture. Potentially, if there's interest in that kind of thing, then potentially. I did a kind of straw poll about 2 years ago and got mixed results. So, I mean, I don't really particularly sell anything to anyone at the moment. So Uh, of course, I mean, it's always something I think about, but at the moment, I'm quite happy just chatting with you about languages. Um, but yeah, possibly. I mean, it's quite nice to have something that you do that you create something, right? It's quite a nice thing to do. And there are definitely books that I've looked into writing for sure. Quelle langue vous considérez les plus menacées en Europe aujourd'hui? Oh, c'est difficile à dire en fait. Ça dépend en fait le pays. Il y a plein de langues comme ça en fait. Moi je dirais que c'est difficile à dire, hein. Heu, les langues les plus menacées. Maintenant ça va un peu mieux. Je crois que c'est plutôt en fait une question de d'où on a la protection, d'une langue. Peut-être que c'est pas une langue, particulièrement menacée dans un autre pays par exemple, mais c'est peut-être une langue menacée dans un pays et pas dans l'autre. Et ça, c'est bien possible, par exemple, ça existe. Hem, mais il y a des pays où on reconnaît moins, les droits linguistiques des personnes. Par exemple, la Grèce, fait pas très bien, avec les langues, indigènes ou les langues, qui sont pas les grecs, dans le pays. Hem, Elle existe, mais pas officiellement, quoi. Donc il y a toujours des problèmes comme ça, au niveau national dans certains pays et ça c'est vraiment un problème. Mais mais je crois que c'est un problème ce qu'il faut résoudre. J'espère que dans l'avenir, on va trouver une solution à ça et que si l'intégrité d'un pays, heu, n'a pas, par exemple, l'idée que qu'elle soit menacée par les langues minoritaires ou bien les langues indigènes ou bien des autres cultures ou bien des voisins, des pays voisins. Hem, donc si on arrive, à ce point-là, peut-être ça va changer un peu. J'espère bien que ça va changer, mais il y a plein de pays comme ça. C'est 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 à peu près normal. C'est aussi au Royaume-Uni, on avait la même chose, on a toujours la même chose avec Scots. Ça c'est le problème, l'écossais, ce qu'on parle, pas l'écossais gaélique, c'est l'écossais, germanique qu'on parle. On a le même problème parce qu'on n'a pas encore accordé les droits aux gens à parler, à étudier dans leur langue et ça, c'est déjà un problème. À mon avis, il faut résoudre ce problème et après, on va voir ce qui va passer. Mais menacé, je sais pas parce qu'il y a, quelques millions de personnes qui parlent, quoi. C'est pas quand on dit un c'est difficile à dire. Hem, En Scandinavie, par exemple, il y avait les langues, sami, qui est aussi heu, vraiment, pour elles, comme des langues, sami, c'est déjà une situation assez grave. Hem, mais j'espère que ça va changer aussi. Hem, je crois que reconnaître, ce qu'on n'a pas fait jusque ce moment-là et changer un peu, comment on va aborder ce problème, et travailler ensemble avec les gens qui parlent, ça va beaucoup aider en fait à retenir et maintenir les langues, dans leur pays, dans leur territoire et puis, continuer comme ça. Avec la France, c'est la même chose qu'avec la Grèce. La France, c'est n'importe quoi avec, les langues minoritaires. Ça c'est au niveau, politique. Parce qu'ils ont pas donné le droit aux Bretons à avoir des fonds pour vraiment, appuyer les communautés linguistiques du breton, et ça, c'est un problème en France et c'est pas que le breton, c'est les autres, langues minoritaires en France, mais ça, c'est un problème maintenant heu, du président, ce qu'il veut pas faire, quoi. Heu, c'est un problème. Hem, Ça change, avec avec chaque gouvernement, ça change et j'espère que dans l'avenir, on va voir les choses différemment, quoi. On va commencer à vraiment reconnaître ce qu'il faut faire pour, s'adapter, avoir un avenir, vraiment plurilingue et pluriculturel. Ça, c'est très important à mon avis, parce que sinon, si on peut pas vivre ensemble et avoir de respect avec, en ce qui concerne la communauté, voisine, je crois que c'est dangereux, je crois que c'est pas bien, heu, mais je comprends aussi, qu'il y a de la haine, qu'il y a des gens qui qui pensent ils parlent d'eux ou bien, je sais pas, c'est déjà c'est un nouveau déjà un peu bizarre, mais c'est ça, ça existe. Heu, mais ça, c'est quelques langues que j'ai aperçues, en fait, pendant les dernières 2 années que j'étudie les langues, minoritaires d'Europe. Um, okay, what's your opinion with France's okay, I think I got that then. Sorry, I just saw that in English afterwards. With the loss of okay, and with the loss of Italy, with the language loss in Italy, yeah. Italy is an interesting one because, it's kind of done a similar thing to France, but not it's kind of done a similar thing to France. Um It's hard to compare 2 countries because they're 2 different histories and 2 different mentalities, so I'm not gonna compare them too much. But yeah, I find that, see, a combination that a comparison I often make with Italy is sort of Indonesia, because you have Bahasa Indonesia that's spoken sort of as a lingua franca, and you have Italian that's spoken as lingua franca. The difference is that with Bahasa Indonesia, some people, yes, they have taken it as the sort of that's the language they speak, but the big difference with Indonesia is that the local languages on different islands often um, still exist and are still spoken as a common thing, right? And they only use Indonesian when they speak. Whereas in Italy, there are many regions that have been very negatively affected by Italian being the sort of the default language, and sometimes it's to do with linguistic similarity. So, for example, if they're so similar to the language spoken on the street, it can be a nightmare. But if they're also so different, it can be a nightmare. So there's kind of a Goldilocks thing, and there are a lot of other cultural and linguistic things going on. I think, particularly cultural reasons going on for people retaining or not retaining community languages, and um, and Italy is interesting, but I Celtic language community with what was happening with Breton. So I can speak to that a little bit, but can't speak too much to Italy. Yeah, let's see. I really like the idea of learning through context and gestures. Yeah, absolutely. And is exchanging my daughter. Okay, is explaining my daughter the, but not sure if you agree with silent period either. No, John, I'm not sure. The silent period's a bit weird for me. Le Brexit est très menacé, ouais, malheureusement. Tout à fait, Richard. Ok, merci. Quel français a du mal à comprendre, d'accord? À l'état français, oui, c'est vrai. How many more languages do you think you are going to study in your lifetime? It depends what happens. If I die tomorrow, none. Who knows? I'm meant to wake up tomorrow, you never know what happens. So I tend not to plan too much. There's definitely a list of languages that I would like to learn. I mean, you heard me speak about Greenlandic, some language that's on my list. I'd love to learn Hindi. I'd love to learn Persian. I'd love to learn so many languages. It's ridiculous. I probably have just too many languages I want to learn. I think I will never run out of them because there are so many of them, and life's only so long, right? So, I mean, we'll see how long I live and how long I'm able to continue studying. But I hope that I'll be able to learn some more before I finish, and before it's game over on this world. We'll see what happens. Sí, m'agrada molt, sí. Hi ha moltes persones que volen també aprendre el català. A mi m'agrada molt. Um, My dad's cousins are from Companion, the generation around 30 years old, all speak it pretty fluently. Yeah, interesting. When you're from a certain region, sometimes it is definitely a very big thing that you keep the language. Do I think it's okay to start with Russian on Duolingo? Um, I'm not going to discourage anyone from using anything. Use what you feel works for you. Personally, for me, with Duolingo, my only issue with it is I love that it's popularized language learning, and I love that it has made it accessible and affordable for many people. The downside with Duolingo for me is that they often have very odd sentences. So we were talking a bit earlier about comprehensible input, and the comprehensible input is actually not just comprehensible input, but also sensible input, sensible things that you would normally hear or read or say or do in a language. The problem with Duolingo is that the sentences are often very nonsensical. So, my pet bee is blue and lives in a green house. And they'll have you translate things like that. And the idea behind it is that you can then manipulate sentences. The problem is when you're starting to learn a language and that's what you're learning, you're actually never repeating any of this stuff. And to really get started with a language, you need to repeat, repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. And it needs to be things that are meaningful. So that's kind of my thought on that. But I mean, I'm as I say, it's the good things about it are that it's definitely budget-wise, it's very doable, and also it's easy to access. So see what you think. But they're my thoughts on it. Let me see. To start speaking some okay, people speed supportive. If you want to learn Irish or Manx side by side, there's a great takeoff video. Few months start on okay. Oh, note the difference between two speakers. Yeah, I think there are some cool things actually where you see sort of discussions between people of two different languages, and you see how much they can understand each other and how it works. I like that. Do you think the adoption of conlangs as natural languages the same as how unrelated language families formed? So conlangs, in terms of as an idea, as an ideal, I quite like the idea that there would be a language that's not sort of the main language for a certain group, because it sort of puts everyone at a similar level, if you know what I mean. There are a couple of issues though. So one is often these conlangs tend to have a bias towards a certain linguistic group. That can be a problem because it's therefore already, before you start, unequal on a world scale. The other issue that you have is that because the languages are not intrinsically linked to a region or an area or a group of people, that are kind of a cohesive sort of with a very specific structure that has weight in that on a global scale. The issue is that, with sort of an economy and all that kind of stuff that goes with an area that you deal with on an international scale, that actually is a disadvantage for these languages, because it means that you don't necessarily have the people pushing them in the same way as you would have, like for English, you have the British Council around the world promoting the English language and culture and whatever else. And then you have the same for Confucius Institutes with Chinese. You have the same for Turkish with Yunus Emre. You have the same with Goethe for German. You have the same with the Dante Institute for Italian. You have the same with the Cervantes Institute for Spanish. You have the same with Alliance Française for French, or Institut Français as well does the same kind of thing. they all have these, and I think Camões for Portuguese, all of these other languages have these institutes around the world, right? And they teach them, or they send their people to universities or whatever. And this kind of power structure from a base doesn't exist in the same way for the conlangs. So the theory behind it is nice. The reality is we have to deal with a lot of people who don't share the same ideals or the same thoughts or the same feelings about these things. And so that's why I don't think that they're sort of adopted fully in the same way as, say, for example, English has been adopted in a number of places. I mean, to the point that a country like Finland is looking at making English an official language of Helsinki. That kind of thing, I think, is less likely to happen for a language, a conlang, like Interlingua or Esperanto or Klingon or another language. I think it's because they don't have the sort of the government or the institutions behind them in the same way. They do have these structures, but not in the same way as a country or a region, if that makes sense. Because there's not one place you can focus your energy on in the same way. That might change in the future, I don't know. But at the moment, I think that is one of the issues, because you don't have, I mean, a lot of people aren't even aware in English-speaking countries, people often don't even know what Esperanto is still. And that's the most well-known language, right? So it's an interesting thing that, in the language learning community, we know about these things. And I talk about this kind of stuff. If you work in a field, and whether it's languages or not, if you work in a field or you study in a certain field, for you, that's your world. And for the people you talk to normally, you all know about these things. The problem is when you go outside of those boundaries, you actually find out how few people are even aware of the things that you think are the most basic. And it's amazing how you can get involved in conversations that get so etherical that actually you completely float off the face of the earth into space with kind of really great ideas, but that's all they remain, are ideas, because ideas that become more ideals than ideas, if that makes sense, because you're no longer sort of connected with the masses of the people still on the ground. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of like how I see it with a lot of these ideas that I hear about, and I get the reasons behind them, and I'm not against them per se. I'm, sort of as a general rule, I'm open to many things, and I'm definitely open to listening to many things as well. But it is very difficult to overcome some of these barriers. Very difficult. I think Esperanto's done a very good job. Just so in terms of like these languages, certain individuals have really played their part to sort of help to enhance the story of Esperanto. I mean, look, it's on Duolingo, and that's great. And they've got a new Teach Yourself book out now for more advanced Esperanto, right? They have lots and lots of meetups. It's actually a very easy thing to get into. Interlingua I see now a lot on TikTok. There's an Interlingua website. So again, you see a lot of these things, right? And this inter-Slavic language as well, I've seen a bit on TikTok. That messes with my mind personally, the Interlingua Slavic or the inter-Slavic one. But I find it just meshes all of the languages in my head to a point that my brain hurts when I've listened to it for too long. But yeah, it's they're interesting though, these languages. What do you think of China's language situation? Oof, very complicated, very complicated. There are echoes of kind of what's happened and is happening still in other parts of the world. So yeah, I mean, that's basically the best way I can express it. It just is. Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot to go into, and this is probably, I mean, we're an hour and 15 minutes into this live, and so not enough time to even start talking about these kinds of issues in more depth. I think I had my first real conversation in Dutch today. Fantastic. Well done. That's really cool. Everything came out so naturally. Thank you for your advice, Richard. The daily videos, you do keep all of us calm and motivated. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Colin. Thank you. It's a lovely way to end this, and I really appreciate you writing something nice about the daily videos. I make them and I think, oh, what can I say in 30 seconds? But I'm glad that you're enjoying them, and I will continue doing them as long as I have ideas floating around in my head. I should disappear in a second. Let me see. Okay. Have you ever encountered Cypriot languages? So Cypriot Greek and Turkish, yes, I have. I have been to Cyprus 3 times. I think three times, 2 or 3 times. And I used both languages there, Greek and Turkish. And I used a lot of Russian in Cyprus as well. I also used Serbian because there were a number of Serbians over there, so I used Serbian quite a lot too. Hey Richard, what's the most interesting method to learn language? So there are lots of ways to learn languages. Possibly a big question for me to finish, but the most interesting way I found that I've learnt languages, and I sort of almost can't believe I did it, using TV with subtitles. It's one of those things that you hear mentioned a lot by people, watch TV, read the subtitles, but I actually have increased my fluency in languages quite a lot by reading TV. Definitely how I improve my Dutch to get to a high level in Dutch. So yeah. Which countries have the easiest time like learning languages? I think you mean here, like with culture or whatever else. It depends on it. I found that where they don't dub the TV is often a big thing. So where they have the TV in the original language with subtitles is often an indication of how well they're going to speak other languages. It tends to have a very strong correlation. And then there are certain languages I think that, yeah, possibly it helps them to learn other languages quite quickly. So, but I don't know if there are hard and fast rules with that, like one better than another particularly, but yeah. Anyway, I better go. Thank you very much for keeping me company today on the live, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. If you have any ideas for a topic, feel free to write them in the comments, and I will take them all on board, and we will speak again this time next week. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day of languages, and thank you so much. And if you haven't subscribed or followed me, please do on my social media accounts, and I look forward to further interactions. Good luck with your language learning. All the best. Bye, everyone.